Hi, good afternoon. This is the TV show of the Sustainability Group, and today we have Chris Bettles as a guest, coming to talk to us all about his travels around the world and his work in the Bristol area. Good afternoon, Chris. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm very good, thank you. How are you doing?
Great. You've been travelling all over, looking at all kinds of projects.
Yeah, exactly. I've spent time exploring the sort of west coast of North America, visiting various projects, working on a film.
And what are you doing with your stuff in Bristol?
So in Bristol, I'm also, so what I've been doing over in North America is filmmaking. We're producing a documentary on transition towns and related projects that go sort of slightly outside the transition branding, but are working within the same remit of kind of grassroots, community-led sustainability initiatives, kind of increasing the sustainability in communities in a realistic and achievable way that is starts from the bottom up. Kind of doesn't require action from the government initially. What I'm doing now, I'm also doing some film work and also online marketing, and I work specifically with sustainable businesses and organisations and other value-led organisations in the UK and occasionally overseas as well. So we do social media management for them and also some video production and other digital services as well.
So do you have projects that you're involved in directly in your home area?
So I've recently moved to Bristol, and I was here very briefly before we went away. Before that I was living in South Wales. And having come back, all my focus has been on, I work freelance at the moment with a couple of other freelancers, and we're looking to set up our own organisation that works specifically for sustainability groups. So other than the projects that I've been involved with in a professional capacity, including things like Big Green Week, which is the UK's largest sustainability festival here in Bristol, I haven't been too active on a personal level out and about. I'm spending a lot of time in front of the computer at the moment after my months of travelling.
So from your travels, what would you say was the underlying things that all community groups should be considering?
That's a really good question. I think that what we have seen time and again, and I don't think it will come as any surprise to you or anyone else watching, is that what often comes in the way of groups achieving things is their issues with one another in terms of working together as a group in an organisation that isn't run in a typical manner, something that is very grassroots and has perhaps no definitive leader. People find it quite hard sometimes to start working in a different way, and it's resource in terms of the amount of money they have to spend on it, and also resource in terms of time. Most people that are getting involved with transition and projects like it are holding down full-time jobs as well. So and they aren't necessarily always related to the wider ethos. So they are going to work Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. They have children. They, not all of them obviously, but typically, and it becomes very difficult. What we have seen, so I think in terms of what all communities or community groups should be looking to do in order to build on what they're doing, is actually to set themselves quite short-term, small targets to begin with, and just focus on that one thing and see how much capacity they have for it. I think it's really easy when you set up a group or you decide you want, or join a group or you want to take it further, is say, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we want to do all these things. And those things are great. And you should have that discussion. You should have that talk with everyone that's involved with the group about where you could possibly go, because that's your dream, that's your motivation, that's your inspiration and what drives you. And then you need to kind of put that conversation to one side and go, right, that's fantastic. That's something to aim for. Now, what can we do in the next 4 weeks? And I think just making what you're aiming for achievable and deliverable, and kind of you can tick that off a list, be it physical or mental, is good for your own sense of achieving things, being able to get things done and be able to get it over. I think it's very easy to set your goals so big, and it takes so long to get there that you think, oh, I haven't done anything. When that probably isn't true, but it sometimes feels like that. And I think also one of the things that really came out of our filming and the groups that we spoke to, they said that it's really important to celebrate all the small achievements that you have, because without that time to just have a bit of a party in whatever form that takes and sort of celebrate what you have achieved so far, it's really hard to keep the momentum going forwards. And actually, some of the best things to come out of community groups, whether they're looking to set up activities for young people, or whether they're looking to improve community energy, or whatever their focus is within, is the fact that they're a community group, is that they're actually multiple people that live in an area coming together to talk about how they can make the area better. And that in itself is a really positive thing for the community, because you're building those connections, you're building those relationships with people that live around you, and in doing that alone, you are building the resilience of your area.
I couldn't agree more with that, really. I think I've seen plenty of evidence of similar things. I'm chairman of a little allotments association. Well, there's only like 30 odd allotments, so 60-ish people, I suppose, roughly involved. And the huge variety of reasons why people do that, number one, and the huge variety of characters that come into play. And the fact this is voluntary, this isn't something I have to do because the boss will pay me or not pay me this week. It's something you do out of your own choice. And the constant battering up against each other about how things should be done, and whether this shed's too smart and tidy for an allotment, or whether it's too tatty for the allotment, or whether somebody's beans aren't doing as well as they should, or we've left it too weedy, or he hasn't cut the grass, and different people's idea of what is acceptable and what's achievable in view of the huge range of skills available too. Some people have been doing it years and years and years and brilliant at it, and they're retired and they can spend all day, every day, making their allotment absolutely pristine without a weed out of place. Others are coming, because they've got 3 or 4 hours a week and they've got a family to feed, and they're trying to get the potatoes dug, and yes, they've noticed that the grass needs doing, so they might trim it, but they're not quite as tidy. And different people's opinions of whether that's good enough or not is very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you've hit the nail on the head with some of the issues you have is you have a lot of different people, say 30 people in a group. It might not seem a lot, but it's 30 people that are trying to work out how to get things done. And you are inevitably, when you reach out, and this is kind of why I like transition as a concept for people that don't know anything about it. It's a kind of alternative to the kind of eco-village movement. The eco-village movement is something that has been going on for many years now, where people decide, right, the world's gone mad, I'm going to go off, I'm going to set up my own community, we're going to live sustainably, we're going to grow our own food, we're going to produce our own energy, we're going to build sustainable housing, we're going to work in a very democratic manner, and we're going to live a lifestyle that is far more how we would like to be doing it, rather than how society is dictating. And actually that movement has been fantastic in identifying ways of achieving a sustainable community. In a way, it's been able to develop technologies have come out of it, ways of sort of governance, without getting too much into that, but ways of managing people have got into it, and it's been a really positive for that. But actually, in terms of getting the world to shift to a more sustainable way of being, particularly the developed world, it's very it's not really a long-term solution.
It's not happening.
It's not happening, and even if everyone wanted to do it, they wouldn't be able to. Most people can't afford to move away from where they currently live. The majority of people are quite stuck sort of where they are, and the reality of our current system is that most of us live in cities around the world. Most of us gravitate around cities, and therefore there needs to be something that integrates those two approaches. If everyone were to go off and move into the hills and set up their own eco-communities, we'd have a lot of problems with all the new developments in in the currently undeveloped land that we actually kind of need like that. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with cities, but it needs to be done very differently. And what I like about the transition movement is that it's not about, well, you know, one day you could go off and you could build your own eco house. It's how can you make the house that you're currently in more sustainable? How can you work with people around you on your in your town, city? A big thing that's come forward in the last year or so with transition is transition streets, where rather than, and that's come out of, I think, people trying to apply transition to a large city, which can be quite overwhelming. And instead it's like, just focus on your street, you know, getting to know people on your street, deciding how you, as a group of however many people on your street, can develop that. And I think that's what I like about it. It's like, what can you do where you are right now and build on that? And I think that learning how to get on with people that you wouldn't necessarily choose to hang around with in a social context is actually really important, because no matter what, you know, when you look at some eco communities, all right, you've got people from all over the world that are living in them, but they're people from all over the world that have very similar values and probably ways of being, and they're living together, and even they struggle. So it is difficult at times to get on with those people, but you have to learn how to cooperate and collaborate with people that you don't necessarily agree with on certain issues and may never agree with in certain issues. And that's the big challenge. It's all very well agreeing with people and working and living and collaborating with people that have completely in line with your views, but actually, if we wait for that to happen, if we wait for everyone to be on board with the same views, we'll never get anything done.
Absolutely true. That's I think it's a view of every community I've ever come against. You come up against people that actually you really don't like very much, but somehow or other you've got to create a community, including everyone, including those people that you don't like very much, or who have opinions who are completely opposite to you. And how are you going to push through and make this work? I think that's community all over in all its guises. That seems to be the issues that it comes up against. And because it's voluntary, you know, what tends to happen is, oh, I don't like that, I'll leave, I'll go away, I'm not going to be part of this anymore. It's the sort of reaction you'll get if that community don't gel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a really tough thing to do. I don't think there was anyone in our entire trip that had completely overcome those issues. There were many, however, that had got pretty close. And I think it comes, there has to be a level of, a level of respect and honesty and transparency in how you work. And actually, with those people that you really clash with, having someone that's perhaps not, you know, on either party that can kind of mediate it to an extent and say, well, look, okay, we don't agree on these issues, but we both still agree on all these other things, and we still want to move forward all these other things. You know, this is an issue that may take time to resolve. It may never completely resolve, but we can actually still work together on a number of things. Trying to leave that is behind and move forward is really commendable, I think. And I think something that I observed quite noticeably was, you know, you talk about it being voluntary and people being involved with it because they want to be involved with it, and not wanting it to be a replica of perhaps their work environment, where it's, you know, run by one person ultimately, and then a few people below them and a few people, is that we're actually really used to that pyramid structure of governance, whether we like it or not. And I think it becomes quite difficult to work in a way that isn't like that. And sometimes people will automatically, perhaps not even consciously, look up to someone to make the decision, or to say, oh, have you done that? You know, you said you were going to do this week. Have you done it? And they're just used to it being answerable to someone. And what happened a number of times in the groups is that the person who kind of really took it forward initially was the person that everyone looked up to say, well, oh, what are we doing next then? And there was multiple people on our trip who kind of like, well, you know, you do it. You know, I'd love to work with you. I'd love to be part of that. And if you want to take that initiative forwards, but I can't do everything myself. And actually, you know, it's okay for you to start it up and lead it and run it just like anyone else. I think with what ultimately has happened in a lot of groups is that older people within the groups, usually those that are retired, have been the ones that, you know, really step forwards and take these groups, keep them going, because they've got more free time to do so. They don't have young children, they don't have a full-time job, and that's fine, that's okay to an extent, but it does get to a point where, you know, they don't want all that pressure on them anymore. It gets to the point where there needs to be sort of new people of different age demographics making choices about the future of it. And I think one of the things that came through really strongly when I spoke to Rob Hopkins, one of the founders of Transition in Totnes before we went to the States, was that where because I was speaking to him on the cusp of it being 10 years since Transition was founded, and he said, I asked him where he wanted to go in the next 10 years, where he wanted Transition to go. You know, it's come a hell of a way in the 10 years that it's been since it's been set up. It's gone from an idea generated in Kinsale Island to a project that has initiatives in over 40 countries, I think almost 50 countries now around the world. So it's come a long way, but he said where it needs to go next is it needs to go beyond what you do on a Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday evening after you've put the kids to bed. And it needs to become part of your daily life and how you live your life. It's fantastic that people are starting to get together after work and in their own spare time and volunteering and collaborating. That really is fantastic that people are doing that and starting to think, well, there needs to be something more done than, you know, what I'm doing. But creating sustainable, ethical business that is in line with the values of Transition and your own values is essential to move forward. We need to create a new economy, in a sense, a green economy, a local economy in some respects. So I think what would be fantastic to see is people starting to integrate the values that they hold around sustainability, and if they, you know, involved with transition, taking that into their everyday life and trying to embody that, and it not be something extra to their work, but actually what their work is.
Tough though, it's a difficult one, because then you've got the ethics of business as well, because it's something I'm trying to do on a daily basis. I run a eco-friendly cleaning company. We use products that were carefully chosen. We try to use machinery that's carefully chosen and carefully maintained to keep it optimal. But at the same time, it's got to make a living. It's got to make a profit. If it doesn't make profit, then you have got nothing to either build your own business up or your other things you're trying to achieve. I think I briefly spoke to you about I'm very interested in utilising aquaponics to grow with, but you've got to buy, or you've got to have somewhere to do it. So you've got to have some land, you've got to have to be successful anyway, you need some heat, a heat source. You need a building or a glass house or a polytunnel or something to grow in. And, you've got to have the resources to do that. And in order to do that, you can do that in many forms, of course. You can collaborate with others to achieve it. But equally, for these things to keep going forward, they have to make a profit. It's sort of, the profit and the people and the places together need to come into being. And I find that's quite a challenge in the business sphere.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, and it is really tough. We, as I mentioned before, so, my business is predominantly on my online marketing. And I say for sustainable businesses, organizations and value-led brands. And that ultimately means that we have to turn down work on occasion, not because, we've got anything that's particularly bad coming to us and asking for services, but something that just isn't really in line with what our ethos is. We specialize in that area, and it can be quite difficult when financially things can be a bit tough and you think, oh God, we need some more work, we need to be doing this. And you have someone come to you and say, oh yeah, we'd like to employ you to do this, that and that. And you look at their organization and you think, nothing about that is really singing to me. Nothing is saying to me, oh, this is a really good cause, or this is something that we can really get behind, this is something we can be passionate about and be completely sound in our decision to work for them and promote what they're doing. And sometimes the response from people that we turn away can be a bit affronted, but you have to make that decision when you can. I think if it comes to the point where, if I turn this away, I'm not going to be able to put food on the table in the next few weeks, then, perhaps it's the best decision to go for it. But I think it's constantly reevaluating that, and to the greatest extent possible, making decisions according to your values, and reassessing what they are. I think there are different times where I have to spend money in places that I wouldn't ideally like to be spending money, because I need to spend less, and actually to spend money where I would like to be on completely sustainably sourced organic food, for example, and things like this. Sometimes that becomes a real pinch financially, and I have to say, well, I try and spend my money locally, if possible, in businesses that I believe in and what have you. And at times I physically can't afford to do that. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent and pay my bills and what have you. And I think as long as you just keep assessing your situation and reminding yourself of what matters to you, then you can do as good as possible and ease yourself into a situation where you can be making decisions that are more in line with your values.
Yes, I agree, because my background training is in agriculture and growing stuff. And there is an awful lot of stuff that is put out as green or organic or some other form of it's supposed to be better for you, and yet actually it's just how do you put it, unprofessional. Somebody's got an idea that this would be nice to do it, but they're not necessarily coming to that field with the same professional abilities and skills. We have a huge number of farmers out there, and they're not all going out of their way to be nasty people, but they're not necessarily growing as sustainably as we'd like them to. It would be more appropriate in a way that we all got behind a farmer in our area and said, well, actually, we like this, this, and this. Do you have to put those things on the ground? Do you have to do this? Do we really need to treat all of the animals? Do we have to blanket treat the whole lot? Can you just treat the ones that are ill? There's all kinds of ways which you can encourage better practice without necessarily, but at the same time we have to be professional, otherwise food and all the other things that we want becomes way, way, way too expensive.
Absolutely. And I think something else which I think is a big issue. Personally, I don't value using guilt to get people to take action. I don't like it as a method, and I think it's used quite a lot. You get the kind of, environmental activists and what have you, and not all of them by any means, but a lot of environmental activists and activists within certain areas that use shaming of practices in order to get results. I'm all up for highlighting issues. If there's issues within supply chains, telling the stories about the terrible things that are happening within supply chains, child labour and treating people unfairly is really good to highlight issues, but it shouldn't be used to make people ashamed of what they're doing. And I think that's a message I always, try and convey. As I was saying with, sometimes I spend money in supermarkets on food and things that I don't necessarily agree with, but I have little choice because financially it's really tough for me to do so. And I don't give myself a hard time about that. I just try and make the best decisions I can as often as I can. And I think that sometimes when people think, oh, actually, I don't have to do everything or feel terrible, then it becomes easier to just start doing stuff more. I think it is great when people say, oh, well, I started eating less meat or what have you because, I know that meat has a big environmental impact, but I don't want to stop meat completely. Fantastic. There's a lot of people within the kind of vegan area that can sometimes be a little militant on their views. And I think that it is fantastic if anyone wants to, for example, not eat any animal products at all. If they want to go down that route, that's entirely up to them, and that's fantastic in the sense that we are consuming too much meat. And if a few people are eating no meat, then that's a big reduction. If that starts to increase, that's fantastic. What I don't ever really try and do is force my views on other people around sustainability and what have you, and just encourage people to do whatever they feel is right to do. Share my views, share my information. And I think leading by example is a much better way than anything. An example of what I'm talking about is actually a couple that worked in California. They set up a vegan restaurant, and it became a vegan restaurant chain, small chain in California. And they were doing this for about 25, 30 years, and they were kind of icons within the vegan movement. And after about 30 years, they started eating meat again. And they were eating sustainable, sustainably grown food, organic meat. And what they started talking about was actually the nutritional benefits of naturally produced meat as opposed to kind of factory farming. They started talking about how, they don't regret their vegan stint at all, and they feel that they did a lot for that. But actually for them, and they feel that ultimately moving forwards, it's better to raise sustainable meat. Well, that is a very reasonable way of coming at the issue, in my opinion. But they were completely slammed, and they were within the kind of vegan sort of community to a large extent, really kind of slammed for their and disrespected for their decision. Now, I don't think that has a positive effect. Ultimately, they have grown the vegan movement massively, which is, in my opinion, only a positive thing. And then they have decided to go down a slightly different route themselves. This isn't a religion we're trying to get people to adhere to. These are conscious decisions that people are making every day, and actually they can change what they believe based on what they know and what they learn and what they experience. And as I think just getting people to think about their values and how their actions can have an impact on the world around them, and just to keep reassessing that, as they go through their lives and make the changes when they feel they are able to, is it's much less intimidating, and people feel less compelled to resist. I don't want to be told how to live my life. No, we're not telling you how to live your life. We're telling you how to think about what matters to you and think about how your actions have an effect on that around you. So that's kind of approach that I think is, as much as you can, whenever you can.
That's the other thing is, of course, in our Western world, our daily view of things is rather influenced, let's say, by the people that live around us in the house down the road, or the one up there who's got the bigger car or the bigger house or the smaller, whatever it is, and we can go into any shop any time, and most of us in the Western world do have, we can get up in the morning, we can choose what clothes we put on, we can choose what we eat, we can decide where we're going to live, we can decide where we work, largely. I mean, that's a bit of a generalism, because obviously that's not true for everybody at all times, and I've certainly been in a position in life where life was not quite so kind and very difficult. But nonetheless, even when my life here was I felt like rock bottom, I then happened, as it turned out, to go to the Thai-Burmese borders and work with refugees, which are basically the Karens and Karanis who have been ethnically cleansed out of Burma and live in the hinterland around the Thai-Burmese borders. When I felt I had nothing, I went there, and my goodness, when I left, I lived in a little grotty grot box in the grottiest town of southeast England. But when I came back, I hadn't moved or gone anywhere, but I lived in a palace. I had things in my home that I didn't even want, let alone need. Relative to what? And when we are surrounded with so much, it's sometimes difficult to relate to people who have literally got nothing, what they stand up in.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think context plays a huge part, and I think sometimes I love to travel, and I'm also aware of the environmental impact that traveling can have as well. For me, I have spent a lot of time in the Americas in the last few years. I've only gone there and back twice. But nevertheless, that's me. I don't have a car here. I travel by bike and public transport if I need to go further. But flying uses several years worth of car emissions in one go. So there is part of me that thinks, oh no, that is it right for me to be doing that? But actually, I think that moderation is key, and the reason I mentioned traveling is because of what you were saying about going out to work with refugees. You get a huge amount of context for the world around you by being there, more than you ever can, I think, by looking at a screen and kind of hearing stories. It definitely goes some way to doing that, but there's nothing quite like being there and having a conversation with people that look at you as if you're extremely wealthy, when perhaps your attitude of yourself is that you're not, that you actually, I just get by, have a bit of money, don't do that much. When you speak to people that have to work in coffee plantations, 15 hours a day, every day, if they can get the work, and if they don't, then they go hungry, then that is a huge context. I think that also has the ability to change your behaviours. For example, as I said before, I make some compromises in terms of what I value and where I spend my money when I'm financially hard up. But having lived in or spent time in coffee plantations in Latin America, I would never buy coffee that I consume at home. I'd never buy coffee that is not fair trade or better than fair trade, because that's if I had to go to every single type of industry in order to have those views, and I wouldn't. But it's for me, and it's not necessarily a rational choice, because perhaps I spend money sometimes in other areas, like when I buy smartphones or computers or what have you, that are unethically produced, and that there are fewer choices around that. But I think when you develop a personal connection with a particular issue, it does have a big effect, because you know what it's doing. When you're exchanging that money, when you're putting that your whatever it is, when you're contributing to an industry, and you look at that brand or you look at those things and you know what's on the other end of it, it does make a big difference. I think, however, having said that, I don't like to preach too much about that, because I don't agree with the shaming of it. I think what is really important, and what I also believe in a wider context, is that people need to be inspired and their imagination needs to be sparked as to what kind of a future we can create, as opposed to what we have to go back to. You know, there's a huge kind of movement, and there has been within the kind of environmental sectors and areas for a while, that actually, you know, we need to go, and to an extent within transition as well, that we need to go back. You know, actually we were doing pretty well, you know, when we were living off the land more, and we were having these, and I appreciate what those people are saying, and I've had those thoughts myself over the years, that perhaps, you know, we just need to live a more natural life in sync with nature and the natural world, and I think we do, but it's very, very difficult to encourage people to go in the opposite direction to where they've come. And I also think there's a lot to be gained by embracing, as we are today, speaking to one another, using technology live on the internet, use it to our advantage and use it to actually take forwards the movement and encourage people to think about what a better world could be created if we go down this route, rather than, well, if we don't, then it's going to flood.
I agree with that, because to me it's you can't really go backwards anyway. Humanity in all its guises, we need individually to improve ourselves, to grow, to learn, to achieve, just for our own satisfaction, not for any other purpose. And if that means that we can devise, I mean, where did the solar panels come from? Where did the recognition that water or wind could be harnessed to create energy, to create items? And if we, because I've been there, I think, because I spent quite a lot of time when I was younger with my young children, I grew all the food that we ate, because I'd been trained in agriculture, I had the skills and I had the space. But the reality is, well, let's say that, insofar as some of it was, let's say, bartered for, because I also milked other people's cows and had some of the milk, and as opposed to actually keeping one, because if I'd had to keep one, I would have had to have a much bigger space than I had. But the reality is, if you're going to go and feed a family, you know, was it John and Sally Seymour's book reckoned 10 acres per family? Well, that's a heck of a lot of ground. It just isn't that amount of space across the world, I don't think, for the number of population we have. I suspect our modern technology has in fact brought that right down, because particularly aquaponics is one of the areas I've studied a bit more carefully. I know you can produce a huge amount of food off a much smaller space using that system. But it's not complete, it's not the whole diet. Yes, you can grow the veggies and you can grow some fish, and you can, you know, turn the waste back in if you use some soldier flies or other means. Probably worms would do the same sort of thing. You're probably going to tack on some poultry, maybe some quails, and produce a few eggs. But that's not necessarily a whole diet. You still got to have the carbohydrate from somewhere or like that, and you've got to grow it somewhere.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no. I think it's a combination of different approaches and just being open to what everything has to offer. You know, I think one of the issues around the transition movement, I mean, it has spread to a large extent, and that's fantastic. You know, what it's done in 10 years, you really can't knock it. No. But at the same time, I feel that there is so much more going on than we're aware of, which, I mean, is partly why we went out to document it and to make this film, because we wanted to find out more about what was happening. You know, we could go on Transition US and we could see that there are initiatives happening, and sometimes it would look like they were really active, and we contact them and actually they hadn't done anything for a while, and vice versa. Sometimes they've got like this holding page of a website, barely anything going on. You contact them, oh yeah, we've got this going on, and then it all comes out. And I think the kind of people that are initially drawn to movements like transition and things like this, they like spending time in the garden growing food. They really value nature and the environment around them, and actually being on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and speaking on video calls and spend lots of time on the computer doesn't really do it for them. And they might even be opposed to it in some ways, and they say, well, it's just, a way of, it just numbs you out, it's just nonsense conversations, it's like, well, okay, to an extent that is true, but then that's like saying, well, conversation is just unintelligent nonsense and numbs you out. It's like conversation is a tool, and I think if you are set on talking, about very unimportant things and having these very basic low-level conversations with people, then that your conversation is never going to do a great deal for you. If you just keep talking to people that are talking about the same nonsense kind of issues. And I see that I see the internet as being very much like that. It's the internet as a conversation. The kind of conversation you have is what's important. It's not necessarily the medium through which you use something. And I think that if you want to, you can use it in a very powerful way. And that conversation that you're having with someone using the internet is public. It doesn't have to be, but often it is public if you're using these social platforms. And people see that. And the more people start to do it, actually, the more it becomes normal. And people start seeing it more and more. One of the big issues I found I went to Central America a few years ago, and I explored sustainability initiatives then. I set up a website which is still active, although not greatly so at the moment, owlpb.org. And we went to all these places and we wrote these articles and we made some film, but I didn't get on camera and sort of tell people about what I was doing. And that was because I kind of didn't want it to be about me. I wanted it to be about the people that I was visiting and about their stories, rather than, this white middle class 21-year-old, 22-year-old going traveling. Actually, what I realized is that, like, the first people you're going to reach are the people that already know you, and then they might start sharing it, they might start getting out there. And actually, people want stories about people they can relate to and their experiences. And so, starting to put myself on camera when we were filming this documentary series in the form of kind of regular video blogs, updating people on what we're doing, was, it was putting the spotlight on me a bit. It was kind of announcing to all the people I'd known and grown up with around school that actually I was really passionate about something. I really cared about this, and I may have slightly unconventional views and attitudes, and that was a bit of a thing, pushing that out to your networks. But I would really encourage anyone to who has strong views or passions around certain areas, whatever it is, but I'm thinking about in the context of sustainability, is actually to share about it and to tell the world what your views are. I think that it's really important to say, this is what I believe, and this is why I'm doing these things. And guess what? I went out and I spent the day planting trees today, and tell people about it. Not because you're trying to brag or preach or get people, be self-righteous, but because it's something you care about. And when people see you doing that, that gives them the kind of encouragement to do the same themselves, I think.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more again with that sentiment, because I've had similar problems myself in trying to decide about those sorts of issues. How do I go about making loads of little videos that says, well, this is how you can make, this is how you distill an oil, this is how you make your own soap, this is how you create your own cleaning products, as though somehow I'm the guru of that, when actually all I am is somebody who's taken enough interest to go and study it and find out from a number of different people the way they did it, had a go myself and worked out that this way works for me, or maybe I was able to test something to show that this worked better than that worked. And at the end of the day, that's all you can do. You can only put out there what you have experienced. And if you try and put things out there that you don't know enough about, which lots of commercial TV is just presentation of somebody else's resource or somebody else's research and not necessarily your own belief, then not always, of course, but how else are people going to get an authentic view? And also, the more of us that do these things, particularly the simple things that anybody could copy, the more likely they are to have a go.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, if you've got a skill, share it, put it out there, and also experiences that you have. I'm starting to realise more and more, and I haven't been doing enough of it myself in terms of, you know, videos and things like that. But you never know who's going to be thinking the same way you are, and actually by sharing that, it's a really good way to encourage others to realise that actually it's okay to think how they think, even though it might not be a particularly popular view. And you know, I share a lot of things kind of a political nature on social media and things like that. And often I get really aggressive responses from, they may even be friends or old friends or acquaintances, family members even. And I kind of, it does put a lot of people off of sharing those views. I think we saw that as a nation very strongly during the recent referendum. You know, it suddenly everyone became highly politicized, and I actually think it's a really good thing. I think that you know, it's really good for people to be able to express their views. I don't condone, you know, personal attacks on people regarding their views, but you know, they are important issues, and the fact that we get heated about them, I don't think is a bad thing. There's a video blogger called Elliot Holtz who does a lot of personal kind of fitness and training, strength stuff, and he also does some kind of life advice, you know, and this is just the stuff that comes that he's developed over the years about how to be, how to think, how to feel. And you know, he gets trolled because he has a lot of views on his channel. He gets terrible trolls, people telling him that, you know, who does he think he is to be doing this and that and the other. And he said, you know, if you aren't pissing someone off, then you're not doing a very good job, because you're not saying anything that's worth listening to. And I think that can be actually taking that away and thinking, do you know what, if people aren't getting a bit worked up about what I'm saying probably isn't worth much.
It's not having much effect.
Yeah.
If everybody agreed with you, well, look, no, we'd all be doing the same thing in the world. I mean, the truth is that, you know, there are many, many different opinions on every subject, and it's being strong enough to hold your own, I think. So where do you see yourself going long term then, Chris? What do you hope to achieve over the next 5, 10, 15 years with your...
So I would like to... I see my role within the wider movement that is this push towards sustainability as kind of telling stories and giving a voice to people that are doing fantastic things, whilst kind of living my life in a way that is as sustainable as it can be. I have a real passion for making film, and that's why I'm making the current documentary, The Secret of Change, which should be out this November. And I'm also doing some work, obviously the online marketing, and we're building this at the moment. So I would like to see myself as getting to a stage in the next sort of 5 to 10 years where we have the ability to assist organisations and causes that are doing fantastic things in the world, from really reaching out beyond the usual remit and really spreading the word about what they are doing. And I think that's kind of my goal, really. It's so hard to know what you're going to be doing next year, let alone in 5 years, but that has been the overarching sort of trajectory of my journey for the last few years, and I see that as continuing. You know, I would really like to be able to give a strong voice to people and organisations that are doing fantastic things, and try and benefit their cause as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. And is your the you did quite a bit of stuff around North America, did you say? Are they community things? Are they individual projects? Were they food based, or were they all sorts of things?
It was a full range, really. So transition towns are obviously one model of community organisation, and that looks at all aspects of sustainability, from energy to food to transport to the sustainability of community in itself, the relationships between people and managing that side of things. Really does cover a broad spectrum. And as well as transition groups, we were looking at other types of group that might not call themselves transition but still adhere to similar values in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So it really did vary from just people that are doing fantastic things. There might be like a small handful to organisations like Village Vancouver, which is a transition group, and one of the, I think they have a membership of I think they have over 1,000 people on their membership list, although less than that actively engage on a regular basis. But quite a large organisation really that happens fairly laterally, and they do address lots of different areas of focus. And I think that's the thing with transition as well, is that it doesn't require you read the book cover to cover and go, right, we're going to do all of the things within it. That can be really overwhelming, and that goes back to my first point, I think, which was start small, see what you can do, and then kind of have a party, celebrate it, and move on to the next thing. So it really is about taking what you're passionate about and following that. If you're really passionate about growing food, but you really energy doesn't do it for you, trying to set up community-owned energy projects in your area can be a really tedious task if you're not really passionate about it. So actually just focusing on the food side of things can be the best thing to do, because that's what you have the passion and the energy for. With transition groups, what often happens is that other groups come off of the back of them and then kind of end up operating separately, still very much linked to, but they kind of manage themselves. A good example of that is the Bristol pound. It's a very successful local currency that obviously exists here in Bristol and surrounding area, and that came off of Transition Bristol. Transition Bristol was the first transition city. The Bristol pound was the local economy aspect of transition. They developed it, and now they run as a completely separate organisation, its own entity. But of course, they still collaborate with the transition group massively as well, because it's less about ownership than it is about results and achieving what you can for the movement as a whole.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think we're sort of running towards the end of the time now, and I believe you've got things you've got to get on with as well.
I have very busy at the moment. Very busy.
I hope you'll come back and talk to us again in maybe a few weeks, and
absolutely, yeah, it'll be a pleasure.
Particularly when that film of yours gets off the ground. I'm looking forward to seeing where you've been and what you've looked at, and as you say, to give a voice to some of these other projects. And I can't help thinking that the more we spread these things, also the more we particularly when we put our own direct experience involved in it, that helps other people to see that this thing that they had an idea about, and maybe they had a go and it didn't work, that there are different ways of looking at it and different ways of achieving it, and that maybe it's just that in their area, the soil was different. That's why X didn't grow or Y didn't grow, and they put the seeds. Like for instance, if you throw seeds in the ground where I live, it's all chalky top, sand underneath. There's no water retention. They don't grow. End of. They don't come up. So in this area, we have to work a bit harder at keeping some moisture there for them to grow. But perhaps if you didn't know that and you've had a go several years in a row and you can't get your seeds to grow, you think you're useless. And it's not you. It's just that you've not recognised that actually the problem is your seeds aren't retaining the moisture. And I strongly believe in lots of little things going out there, lots of small, doable, attainable things that we can all have a crack at.
And that's it. Just have a crack at it, because whether it goes wrong or not, you will still have gained something from it. I think if you're determined to achieve a certain result, like if you want your city to be carbon neutral in 5 years and you don't hit that, then that's going to be demoralizing, and that's a really difficult thing to do. I don't think there's any city that has completely done that yet. However, if you say, well, actually just doing it, just thinking about it, and just making time, whether it's your professional time or your free time, to act on these things, is in itself a success. That means that people are thinking about their impact on the world, how they can make a difference, and they're doing something about it. That in itself is successful, in my opinion. And if you can just get lots of people doing it, it doesn't really matter what, we didn't quite achieve what we wanted to achieve. So what? You've talked to 10 people in your local area about what your vision is for the future of where you live. And that in itself is a success. And I think that's what you need to focus on. Everyone falls at various hurdles, and we're only human.
Thank you very much, Chris. We look forward to seeing your The Secret of Change.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Debbie.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.